U.S. President Donald Trump says a peace deal with Iran is complete, with the Strait of Hormuz set to reopen and a formal signing ceremony scheduled in Switzerland on June 19th. Korea's benchmark Kospi climbed above 8,600 during trading, and a strong buying momentum prompted the activation of a buy-side sidecar shortly after the market opened, as investors welcomed reports of the U.S. Iran peace deal. President Jung-hoo held talks with Pope Leo XIV at the Vatican on Monday, focusing on efforts to advance peace and solidarity around the world and foster peace on the Korean Peninsula. At the Vatican, President Jung-hoo held his first meeting with Pope Leo XIV, with peace on the Korean Peninsula topping the agenda. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Appearing in a black suit and gray tie representing respect for the Holy See, President Lee Jae-myung was given a welcome at the Vatican, along with First Lady Kim Hae-kyung. In their first meeting on Monday, regional peace was a key topic between the president and Pope Leo XIV.
The president explained to the Pope our people's desire and government's vision for peace on the Korean Peninsula, and reaffirmed the Vatican's unwavering support for peace and reconciliation on the peninsula.
Details were undisclosed, but there is a possibility that the president asked the Pope to pay a visit to North Korea in the future. The leaders agreed to closely cooperate for the success of World Youth Day Seoul 2027, during which President Lee invited the Pope to South Korea. The president also met Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State. The Korean leader presented the Pope with a sculpture representing God's embrace, referring to the prodigal son from the Gospel, and Cardinal Parolin with a desk set made using Korean traditional lacquer painting. The message of peace was also an overarching theme during a special mass on Sunday at the Basilica of St. Paul, with the president once again making it clear that the South does not seek reunification with the North by absorption.
정전 상태를 넘어 지속 가능한 평화 체제를 구축하기 위해서도 할 수 있는 모든 것을 다할 생각입니다.
The South Korean president also promised the country would play a greater role in the world during the special mass speech.
한반도의 평화가 세계 평화로 이어지고 세계의 연대가 다시 한반도의 평화를 굳건하게 만드는 선순환을 함께 만들어 가기를 희망합니다.
All this as the South Korean president sends a message of peace and solidarity as the world continues to face conflicts and tensions remain high on the Korean Peninsula. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, the Vatican.
A tentative U.S. Iran agreement to halt hostilities appears to be taking shape, with the formal signing ceremony reportedly set for Friday in Switzerland. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
The deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete. Congratulations to all. Posted on Truth Social Sunday, President Trump's statement declared an end to the 106-day war. It follows the finalization of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding in Tehran, a bilateral framework mediated by Pakistan and Qatar that orders an immediate end to the U.S. naval blockade and a toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Nearly 14 to 15 hours of lengthy talks took place, during which we presented the Islamic Republic of Iran's final amendments to the text. Naturally, those amendments were accepted, and the text of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding was finalized.
The accord mandates an immediate and permanent cessation of military operations across all fronts, explicitly including active conflict zones in Lebanon. While political authorization is immediate, the physical removal of naval assets and active mine clearance across the Strait of Hormuz are projected to take between 2 weeks and 30 days. President Trump later modified his timeline, stating that the formal opening for oil transit will coincide with the official signing ceremony scheduled for this Friday in Geneva, Switzerland. Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile and broader nuclear program have been deferred to a secondary 60-day phase of structured negotiations. President Trump framed the deal as an unprecedented victory that prior administrations failed to achieve. Iran's semi-official Mehr news agency reported what it says is a 14-point draft of the deal, which includes a 30-day window to lift the blockade under Iranian arrangements, a $300 billion U.S.-led reconstruction plan, and the release of half of Iran's frozen funds before final talks begin. Washington has yet to confirm these points, and Tehran is apparently claiming victory in the war.
The United States was forced to sign a memorandum to end the war with the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Resistance Front.
As for the signing ceremony in Geneva, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is scheduled to lead the American delegation. White House officials indicate that President Trump may also attend the signing ceremony. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, as the tensions surrounding the U.S. Iran situation continue to evolve, Seoul says its top priority is the safe return of Korean ships and crews remaining in the Strait of Hormuz. Jo Young-eun has more.
Following the breakthrough agreement between Washington and Tehran, the Korean government is expected to focus its diplomatic efforts on ensuring the safe passage of Korean vessels stranded in the Strait of Hormuz, as it remains unclear whether the strategic waterway will immediately return to normal operations. The government said on Monday that officials are cautiously monitoring the situation. The vessels have been anchored in relatively safe nearby waters, including ports across Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. According to the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, a total of 24 South Korean vessels and 137 Korean crew members currently remain in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran imposed a blockade in late February at the start of the conflict. Since then, Seoul has maintained consultations with Iranian authorities, and the HMM-operated oil tanker Universal Winner became the first South Korean ship to successfully exit the strait last month. An LNG carrier operated by a South Korean shipping company also passed through the Strait of Hormuz last week through direct coordination with Iranian authorities. The government has continued reviewing participation in international security initiatives, including the U.S. proposed Maritime Freedom Construct, or a separate multinational mission led by France and Britain. And according to the Ministry of National Defense, Korea is actively participating in international discussions on cooperation regarding the Strait of Hormuz. The issue is also expected to be discussed at the G7 summit in France on Monday, especially in relation to international efforts to ensure maritime security in the Gulf and potential military contributions. Jo Young-eun, Arirang News.
Global oil prices are tumbling after Washington and Tehran announced a peace deal and plans to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, easing concerns over energy supplies. But how soon could drivers see relief at the pump? Park Chun-an has more.
Global oil markets are breathing a sigh of relief. Following the peace deal announcement between the United States and Iran, Brent crude futures dropped by 4.19% to $83.67 a barrel. US WTI also fell 4.84% to $80.77, while easing geopolitical tensions pushed the dollar down to a 10-day low. Brent crude, for example, has fallen roughly 34% from its 4-year high of more than $126 a barrel, reached in late April 2026. For a country like Korea, which relies on the Middle East for about 70% of its crude oil imports, the conflict in the Middle East caused a strain on the economy. During the conflict, domestic gasoline prices surged past the 2010 won per liter mark in early May, but are currently hovering around the 2001 level after 4 consecutive weeks of slight declines. However, despite the recent plunge in global prices, consumers will not see cheaper gas right away. This is because of a structural time lag in the domestic pricing system. It typically takes 2 to 3 weeks for international price changes to reach local gas stations, factoring the time needed for sea transport, refining, and clearing out old inventory. On top of that, a weak local currency along with war-related insurance premiums and elevated freight costs continues to place a heavy burden on shipping companies. Even though the Strait of Hormuz is set to reopen, local refineries say a complete return to normal will take months, as companies must wait until the waters are completely cleared of risks, like sea mines and safe navigation is fully guaranteed. Looking ahead, the Korean government plans a cautious approach. While alternative non-Middle Eastern oil supplies have been secured through August, the government is keeping the fuel price cap in place to avoid a sudden rise in inflation. Park Junan, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, investor confidence returned to South Korea's financial markets on Monday, following reports of a breakthrough between the U.S. and Iran, sending stocks higher and strengthening the Korean won. Kim Jun-ong has the details.
Korean stocks jumped on Monday as investors welcomed news of a ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran. The benchmark Kospi closed 5.2% higher at 8,545.98. The index jumped more than 5% shortly after the opening bell, triggering a buy-side sidecar. The secondary Kosdaq also finished slightly higher, gaining 0.48%. Such advances were fueled by improved investor sentiment following the Washington-Tehran deal. The outbreak of the Middle East conflict triggered sharp fluctuations in Korean stocks. Before the outbreak of the war, the Kospi had climbed above the 6,300 mark intraday in late February. It later plunged more than 20% to the 5,000 level before rebounding above 8,000 as geopolitical risks and semiconductor shares fueled repeated rallies and sell-offs. The foreign exchange market has also faced continued uncertainty. The $1 exchange rate closed Monday at 1,511.11, down 8.71 from the previous session. While the won has recovered some of its recent losses, it has continued to see fluctuations around the 1,501 level over the past month. The easing of geopolitical tensions is expected to provide a near-term lift to the market. Yet analysts caution that the end of the conflict does not automatically remove broader economic risks.
The end of the war does not mean an immediate drop in oil prices. Supply chains have been disrupted, and normalization could take at least 3 months. That means inflationary pressures are likely to persist through the second half of the year.
Tighter monetary policy is also seen as a key risk. Further tightening by major global central banks could reduce capital flows and market liquidity, making it harder for high-valuation stocks to maintain their momentum. It could also weigh on broader economic fundamentals as consumer demand may begin to soften, even if major economic indicators continue to appear resilient on the surface. Kim Jun-ong, Arirang News.
With the Middle East tensions easing now, a social media post by U.S. President Donald Trump has fueled speculation that Washington and Pyongyang could resume dialogue. Our Kim Bo-kyung has his report.
With Trump announcing that the U.S. and Iran have reached a peace deal, and in the months-long war in the Middle East, people are looking to see whether the talks between Washington and Pyongyang could be restarted. This as U.S. President Donald Trump posted a photo of himself with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Truth Social on Saturday. The photo showed Trump walking with Kim through the gardens of Singapore's Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island, the site of the first U.S.-North Korea summit in 2018. Trump posted the image without any comment, but it was enough to fuel speculation that he could turn his attention to stalled talks between the two sides. One expert said it meant that Trump was willing to talk with Kim, but added there seems to be no coordination yet.
While the photo signals interest in U.S.-North Korea dialogue, the lack of any message suggests there has been no real movement toward talks yet.
When it comes to how North Korea might respond to such a signal from Trump, experts said the chances of resuming talks were not that high.
With the Russia-Ukraine war still ongoing, and both China and Russia backing North Korea, Pyongyang likely has less interest than ever in engaging in talks with the U.S.
Another expert echoed the view as the regime keeps calling denuclearization, as the regime's foreign ministry spokesperson put it, an irreversibly finalized matter. In fact, the expert pointed this out as a reason why the talks are difficult to resume, as the regime has enshrined its status as a nuclear-armed state in its constitution.
In the past, denuclearization was linked to peace building, improved U.S. North Korea relations, humanitarian cooperation, and lifting sanctions. But now, Pyongyang shows no willingness to compromise on denuclearization or even consider it as a subject for negotiation, making talks extremely difficult.
The expert further added that the fact that the war in the Middle East was triggered over a uranium enrichment program that had not even reached weapons-grade levels would make it harder for Trump to accept what North Korea wants, nuclear state status, as he would then face criticism of having double standards. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Unification Minister Jung Dong-young says Seoul must continue pursuing dialogue with North Korea, despite what he described as Pyongyang's harsh, heavy, and cold silence. Marking the 26th anniversary of the June 15 Inter-Korean Joint Declaration on Monday, Jung said the task facing the government is to transform a hostile two-state relationship into one of peaceful coexistence. In a Facebook post, Jung pointed to the Lee Jae-myung administration's efforts over the past year to improve ties with the North, but said those initiatives had yet to receive a response from Pyongyang. Still, he stressed that Seoul cannot give up on dialogue or stop taking steps toward peace, saying it's always the darkest before the dawn. Ahead of his departure for this year's G7 summit in France, U.S. President Donald Trump on Sunday spoke separately on the phone to his Ukrainian and Russian counterparts about a potential peace plan. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy each had separate phone calls with U.S. President Donald Trump on Sunday, ahead of this week's G7 summit, where the war in Ukraine is expected to be a major topic. According to the Kremlin, Putin's conversation with Trump lasted just under an hour. Russian officials said Trump stressed the need to end the conflict and expressed a willingness to work with European allies and Ukraine toward a settlement. Moscow also stated that Trump suggested a swift end to the war could lead to a significant improvement in U.S.-Russia relations. Putin, meanwhile, reportedly argued that Ukrainian attacks on Russian civilian infrastructure would not alter the situation on the battlefield and reiterated his openness to meeting directly with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy. Separately, Zelenskyy described his own call with Trump as productive. In his evening address, the Ukrainian president said he wished Trump a happy 80th birthday and thanked him for the support Washington has provided throughout the war. Zelenskyy said the two discussed steps that could help bring peace closer and that he updated Trump on the situation along the Eastern Front, where Ukraine's position has recently strengthened.
We have one wish for President Trump. All Ukrainians do, that peace can finally be achieved so that we can achieve this success together with America, together with all our partners.
The Ukrainian leader added that the two agreed to continue their discussions at the G7 summit, where he is expected to join world leaders later this week, as efforts to end the war remain high on the international agenda. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Korea is hosting a culture expo in Paris to bolster experts from Korea's cultural industry. The K-Expo France 2026 runs from Tuesday through Friday as part of celebrations to mark the 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties between the two countries. The event features Korean consumer products and immersive content technologies of major companies, as well as themed zones showcasing K-food, K-tourism, K-cosmetics, among others. A K-pop concert on Wednesday will headline the event with artists including Taemin, Monsta X, NCT Wish, and Hearts to Hearts. Now, Culture Minister Choi Hee-young is also scheduled to sit down with French culture officials and arts leaders in Paris. Proficiency in the Korean language is increasingly opening doors to higher education and career opportunities over in Vietnam. Kim So-young has this story.
Nervous test takers check which room they were assigned to before heading inside. This is the first test of proficiency in Korean, or TOPIK, held in Vietnam this year. Last year, more than 85,000 people in Vietnam took the test. That was the largest number of test takers anywhere in the world. Korean culture may have sparked the interest, but job opportunities are now giving more Vietnamese a practical reason to study the language.
This test gives employers an objective measure of my Korean ability, and it will help me find a better job.
The boom is also being fueled by growing economic ties between South Korea and Vietnam. As more Korean companies expand into Vietnam, demand for workers who can speak Korean has grown rapidly. Vietnam's education authorities are also moving in step. After choosing Korean as one of the most important foreign languages in 2021, the country now has about 35,000 students learning Korean at roughly 80 universities and 160 high schools. The momentum is expected to pick up even more. Starting this year, TOPIK scores can be officially recognized as scores in Vietnam's high school graduation exam.
Students who earn level 3 on the test or higher can be exempt from the foreign language test of the graduation exam.
But as the number of test takers grows, cheating is becoming a rising concern. Last year, 554 cheating cases were reported nationwide, the highest on record. As the number of test takers continues to grow, stronger safeguards will be needed to ensure the exam remains fair and credible. Kim Seoyoung, Arirang News.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. For that, we have our sports editor, Paul Nate, joining in the studio. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you. Hello.
Paul, let's start with the World Cup. The 2026 World Cup is barely a week old, but already it's been so eventful.
Yes, even with only half of the first group stage games having been played, already there have been some surprise or milestone results. For instance, Australia beat the much-fancied Turkey 2-0. For only their second ever group opener win at a World Cup. And Nestori Irankunda, who got the first goal, became Australia's youngest ever World Cup goalscorer at 20 years and 125 days. Scotland beat Haiti 1-0. It was Scotland's first appearance in a World Cup since 1998 and first win at a World Cup final since 1990. There have been some big wins too. Germany beat debutants Curaçao 7-1. Curaçao's first made it 1-1, their first ever at a World Cup, so it was celebrated like a winner. And Sweden beat Tunisia 5-1 in a surprisingly one-sided result. The three host nations have started well. They're unbeaten, in fact. The USA beat Paraguay 4-1. Mexico got that 2-0 win over South Africa. And Canada drew 1-1 with Bosnia and Herzegovina.
You know, Paul, it's also been a good start for the AFC contingent. To tell us more.
It has, yes. In fact, they are unbeaten so far from 4 games played by the Asian Football Confederation nations. It's been 2 wins and 2 draws, South Korea and Australia with the 2 wins, both with 2 goals scored. For Korea, it was their first group stage opener win since 2010 and only the second time they'd come from behind in a group stage opener, the first time since 2006. The Socceroos, meanwhile, last won an opener in 2006 when facing Japan. The 2 draws came from Qatar, who got a very late equaliser against Switzerland, and Japan, who came back from behind twice to draw 2-2 with one of the favourites, the Netherlands. Still to come are the matches in groups G to K.
Well, still lots to look forward to then. Now, moving away from the World Cup now in baseball, Jung-hoo was back on form after a short drought, right?
Right, yeah. After 2 hitless games, Jung-hoo was back with a couple of singles. He went 2 for 4 on Sunday for the San Francisco Giants. He also scored a run as the Giants run out 5-1 winners over the Chicago Cubs. Batting 7th, Jung-hoo got a single in the 3rd, then got an infield single to 3rd in the 5th inning. But it wasn't just his at-bat displays that impressed. With 2 outs and a runner at second, he caught Michael Bush out on the run, and despite hitting the wall, was able to hold onto the ball. He had gone 0 for 7 over his past 2 games, which brought an abrupt end to what was a career-best 18-game hitting streak. Sunday was his 24th multi-hit game of the year.
Well, lastly, to golf, Paul, I understand a South Korea duo came runner-up at an LPGA team event. Tell us more.
Right, yes, the Dow Championship in Midland, Michigan on Sunday. The team of Che Hye-jin and Kim Hyo-joo finished second at 15 under 265, just 2 strokes behind the winners Gina Kim and Yana Wilson of the US. They began the final round with a 1-stroke lead and went up to 2 runs ahead at 11 under, but despite a bogey-free round of 5 under 65 on the final day, they were unable to hold off Kim and Wilson. Rounds 1 and 3 feature foursomes where teammates take turns on a single ball. Rounds 2 and 4 switch to 4-ball with players tracking their own balls and counting the best score on the card. Elsewhere, Im Jin-hee and Lee So-mi finished tied for 3rd in their title defence at 14 under.
Great stuff as always. I'll see you next week, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah.
Tomorrow's Seoul's highs are expected to soar to around 33 degrees Celsius, with a chance of setting another new high for the year just one day after today's record. In particular, many areas in the western regions will see feels-like highs climb to around 31 degrees Celsius. With the risk of heat-related illnesses rising, it's important to take extra care of your health. Following today's sunshine, most parts of the country will enjoy clear skies again tomorrow. However, the strong sunshine will push UV levels into the very high range in many parts of the country. And ozone concentrations will be elevated in many areas, with northern Gyeonggi-do province seeing very bad levels. Tomorrow, morning temperature will be slightly above seasonal norms. Seoul will start the day at 21 degrees, Daejeon at 19 degrees, Busan at 20 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 33 degrees, Chuncheon at 32 degrees, Daegu at 31 degrees. Looking ahead, we'll continue to see clear skies through the week, with midsummer heat holding on and temperatures likely staying around 33 degrees. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Da-mi. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
해금은 2줄로 된 한 악기인데 저도 처음에 시작하게 된 거는 그 2줄에서 너무 다양한 소리가 나오는 게 너무 신기했고, 일단 해금이 되게 사람의 목소리랑 좀 비슷하다고 많이들 하세요. 줄을 눌러서 이렇게 음을 계속 왔다 갔다 진동하는 그런 형태를 띠고 있다 보니까 애절하다라고 많이 말씀을 해주시는 것 같아요. 이 곡은 제가 좀 오래 좋아했던 친구에 대한 제 여러 감정을 담은 곡인데요. 슬펐던 마음, 혹은 뭐 고마웠던 마음, 이런 여러 가지 감정들을 한데 묶어서 마음이 담긴 곡이라고 할 수 있습니다. 현대적인 음악으로 이제 재구성하는 단계를 거칠 때 항상 중요하게 생각하는 거는 음악의 분위기를 해치지 않는 선에서는 그러니까 전통적인 주법들, 식임새 이런 전통의 냄새라고 할까요? 맛? 이런 걸 살릴 수 있는 요소들을 좀 집어넣으려고 하는 편이에요. 저는 요새 연주하면서도 스스로가 마음도 편하고 몸도 편안한 음악들을 좀 자주 들려드리고 싶다. 제가 음악으로 위로받았던 것처럼 제가 하는 음악들로 여러분들이 좀 위로받을 수 있는 순간이 있었으면 좋겠다. 그런 무대를 만들려고 노력해야겠다라는 생각을 했던 것 같습니다.
Knock, knock. The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Kebion by your side, you can become a Kebion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. After 106 days of conflict, the United States, Israel, and Iran have reached a ceasefire agreement, bringing an end to the war in the Middle East and easing fears of a broader crisis. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz has sent oil prices lower and lifted global markets. Korea's Kospi has surged back above the 8,000 mark, with some even eyeing the 9,000 level. But with the first FOMC meeting under new Fed Chair Kevin Warsh approaching, investors are now watching whether this rally can continue and how interest and exchange rates and global capital flows may shift in the months ahead. To discuss this outlook, we are joined by Shin Se-don, Professor of Business Economics at Sookmyung Women's University. Big welcome, Professor.
Good evening.
And also joining us is William Brown, former member of the Board of Directors at the Korea Economic Institute of America, and who is the principal of NAIA.com. Good to see you.
Yeah, good morning, or good morning my time.
Good morning, Professor Brown. So let's begin right away. The U.S. and Iran, like I've said, have reached a ceasefire agreement. What do you think will be the biggest impact of this agreement on the global economy and financial markets?
Well, you know, in a way, it's already happened. The price of oil is plummeting today and over the weekend. Actually, it's been coming down for about a week as there's been more and more talk of a peace agreement. So yeah, it's all positive. I don't see very many negatives here for almost everybody. Not everybody, of course. Some people like high oil prices. If you're producing oil, you like it. But yeah, I think it's a very, very positive morning for America and for Korea.
Right. It's certainly, we've seen prices of oil stabilizing following the announcement. Then, Professor Brown, how low do you expect oil prices to go further? And could low oil prices and low energy costs affect U.S. inflation and the Fed's policy path?
Yeah, I mean, it's always dangerous to predict a price because we usually say, you know, the current price is the one that millions of people have decided upon. And so who am I to predict it's going to be up or down? But now we have this very good news. And I think actually over time, a lot of people have misunderstood the nature of this collapse in the oil shipments through Hormuz. It's a kind of block that, you know, it can't live forever. It's going to break at some point, and now it seems to be breaking. So I think it's quite predictable that the oil price would come down. I would say, and this is, most people think it'll stay up for a while. I think it'll come down quite quickly. It's about the level it was a year ago for the crude oil, the benchmark prices. And I don't think it'll go much below that. But it's now about $80, I think, in Brent in Texas. So, you know, it could come down another $10, I suppose. But the impact on the markets is already very, very strong, maybe already kind of used up. So we may not see a continued big increase in stock prices, for example.
Right, so we could be seeing figures that we've been seeing not so long ago. But when we turn to South Korea now, Professor Shin, the Kospi climbed above the 8,500 mark after the ceasefire announcement. Do you see this as a temporary relief rally or the start of a broader uptrend?
Well, when it comes to the issue of stock price, you know, not just in Korea, but in any other country, whether this surge right after the ceasefire announcement will be temporary or permanent, I think I cannot be sure because it's not sure how steadfast be the ceasefire agreement between the two countries on the one hand, and on the other hand, macro financial environment in Korea, especially including interest rate and inflation, is going to turn out. How is it going to turn out in the second half? I think there's a lot of risk factor surrounding the stock market. So, you know, 8,500 is, you know, for many people, 8,500 is too high. So even without the Iranian war or even without the ceasefire, I think the price will go down significantly, probably below 7,000 or 6,000. So considering everything around that, I think it's very dangerous to predict, you know, like Professor Brown mentioned about the oil price. I think it's going to be very difficult whether this surge today, reaching 8,500, is going to be another round of broader uptrend. I'm not pretty sure.
Right. Of course, we're just speculating as of the moment. Now, when it comes to the $1 exchange rate, Professor Shin, it remains around the 1,500 level despite easing geopolitical risks. What is driving the weak won? And do you think the government's response has been appropriate enough?
Well, to me, you know, as a financial economist throughout my lifetime, specializing in the exchange rate, fundamental reason for the weakness in won is because interest rate gap between the United States and Korea. You know, United States, the key interest rate is 3.75, and in Korea 2.5. So the gap is 125 basis point, and it is huge. You know, that interest gap has been driving Korean currency throughout the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. And that is exactly the same when it comes to the exchange rate of the Japanese yen. The gap between the Japan and United States is even higher. So with that fundamental interest rate gap above 125 basis point, I think it's going to be very difficult, to sustain the exchange rate down below 1,500. So I think sooner or later, Bank of Korea will dedicate itself to correct the gap. But how much and how fast, that is the question. But I'm pretty certain that the Bank of Korea will raise the key interest rate from 2.5%, possibly 2.75, or even 3%. And that, I think, is going to be most important policy measure, as long as stability in the exchange rate is concerned, that the Bank of Korea and the Korean government has to conduct.
Right, so we will go back to the BOK's decision as we speak further. But before that, let's also talk about the FOMC meeting coming up, which is the first under new Fed Chair Kevin Warsh. Professor Brown, I might have to ask you to speculate again, but what decision do you expect there, and what key signals should markets watch for?
Well, unlike the oil price, this is very easy to speculate on. Now they're here in America, there are betting markets for everything. I really don't like it, a lot of politics. But there's a betting market for what the Fed is going to do, of course. And about 2 weeks ago, I think the betting market was saying 68% of rise in the interest rate. Well, that would hurt Korea greatly, or hurt the won greatly if we raised it more. But now last week, the betting market had it down to about even. Now, if you look at it today or on Friday, even before this peace agreement, it was 98% sure that the Fed would keep rates stable this week. So I'm virtually sure. Nobody's saying they're going to raise or lower. The issue, though, is really longer term. And the new Fed chairman has a reputation of being a hawk, meaning he's tight. He wants to be tough and raise interest rates generally. Now, Trump, of course, hates that idea, and Trump, they must have had a good discussion before he became Fed chair. So what is going to happen, say, 6 months from now, a year from now, that's the key question. And the problem for the U.S. may not be quite understood in Korea, but the U.S. has two huge deficits, trade deficit and the fiscal deficit. Both are nightmare proportions. And Trump has been working on both of them with the tariffs, for example. The tariffs kind of eat away at both of those deficits. But the results are not quite clear. It's dampened both of them a little bit, which is very good news. But the longer term, we still have these huge deficits to finance. And that keeps the interest rates, the longer term interest rates, fairly high. So mortgage rates are like 6%. That's way over inflation. So that's trouble. That's trouble for our housing industry. So there's a lot of difficult decisions that will have to be made, say, 3-6 months out. One thing I failed to mention, though, earlier, you asked the impact of the gasoline or the crude oil prices on U.S. inflation. Mm-hmm. And the last number that came out last month was a high. We had 4.2% CPI inflation year over year. So, but that was hugely related to a huge jump in gasoline prices, which already were coming down and now will come down even more. So I think the CPI will show very little growth for the rest of the year. That will make it much easier to not raise interest rates, and I suspect there'll be a lot more talk about lowering them.
Right, so we will keep close tabs on the latest decisions and the messages coming up. Now, beyond that, Chair Walsh's first press conference would also have a huge effect on markets, we believe. Professor Shin, if his message is more hawkish or dovish than expected, what impact could it have on Korea's stock market and exchange rate as well?
Well, just looking at Chairman Walsh's previous kind of speeches, I think it is really difficult to say whether he is a dovish or hawkish, because he has mentioned many confusing, statements. And also, tactically, I think Walsh's tone this time would be intentionally equivocal in the sense that he doesn't want anybody determine he is too hawkish, nor he would, people say he's a dovish. So he will remain kind of a dubious stance throughout the first kind of FOMC meeting. So on inflation, he will probably emphasize the hawkish kind of statement, but on financial stability, which is also a very important kind of element, and the role that the Federal Reserve has to play, I think he will probably mention the dovish kind of statement. So at his first meeting in FOMC, I think it's going to be very difficult to judge his stance on whether he is a hawk or dove. So we should not expect very much. And I agree with Professor Brown that this time, in the June meeting, FOMC decision will be very certain that there's no change in the rate, and everybody expect that, and they will concentrate on how the future stance of FOMC be about interest rate, and that I think depends upon inflation. I have a little different view on inflation because change in crude oil price, unlike the change in every commodity prices right after the COVID-19, even if it goes down below $60 per barrel, I think it would have very negligible effect upon CPI. So I think CPI is going to be the headache for FOMC for the second half of this year, and in that reason, for that reason, I think it's going to be very difficult not to raise the rate at least 2 times, this year. That is my perception about FOMC's future behavior.
Thank you for that opinion, Professor Shin. Now, when we look ahead, global investors are continuing to favor U.S. tech giants and newly listed companies like SpaceX. So after the ceasefire and the FOMC, how likely is foreign capital to flow into Korean stocks, and what could trigger outflows, Professor Brown?
Yeah, this is one thing I've been looking at quite a lot, and for Korea, because Korea is in an unusual situation with a very strong current account trade surplus. Its fiscal deficit is large, but not compared to other countries. So you wonder, why is the won so weak? And I think, it's right, the difference in interest rates is important. But I think more important is really the predilection for Koreans to invest abroad rather than internally. So if you look at the recent capital account or financial account balance produced by Bank of Korea a couple of weeks ago, it shows, a large, of course, a large inflow on they make a lot of money on trade. You make a lot of money on trade, but you spend it all on investing abroad. That sounds good in ways it is. In many ways, it's very good. But that money going out of Korea to America, largely, to SpaceX, it pushes down the won. And so that's kind of the trouble, and raises potentially interest rate cost in Korea. So domestic investment in Korea is, aside from the really important semiconductors, is very weak, especially in construction. So the Bank of Korea has a very difficult job here, trying to square the decline in the won and the flows of investment. I would argue Korea needs to try to encourage more foreign investment into Korea. It's good to invest abroad, but it's also good to bring in investment. Now, the one difference, though, is that there's a huge amount of American investment, foreign investment, into your 2 huge companies, Samsung and SK Hynix. Those 2 companies, the portfolio investment, they're almost half owned by foreigners, and about half of the foreign ownership is American. So there is a large foreign inflow of money into those two companies, but not into the rest of the country. And the rest of the country doesn't do, I think, enough of their own investing. So I'm thinking it's the Korean government should. They've talked about it for years, ever since I can remember, for 20, 30 years. They've always talked about improving middle-sized companies, middle and little higher-sized companies, making them easier to invest in. I think they need to push to the floor on that and really try to grow up more middle-sized companies in Korea that can induce foreign inflows of capital. And by capital, I mean by equity capital, not so much borrowing. That's kind of my view.
Right.
But of course, others may have quite different views.
Right. A very important point that you've made. Professor Shin, do you have anything to add on to that?
Well, as a Korean economist, we concerned about, Samsung, Hynix. They have exported a huge amount of money. And the problem is that they don't bring their cash into Korea. So, Professor Brown mentioned foreign investor. The more serious problem is, Korean company who made a huge trade surplus, they don't bring back that cash. I don't know why, but there are many, the aspects about it. But that, I think, is one of the reasons that, even with kind of a huge current account surplus, Korean currency has been weak throughout the last year. So I think that was another problem that Korean economy is facing right now.
Right. So going back to Korea's Bank of Korea that we've touched upon a while ago, new Governor Shin Hyun-song has hinted of a rate hike. Professor Shin, do you see a rate hike happening as early as next month, and what is your outlook?
Well, next month, month is July. I think it's a 50-50 chance in July. And the action of the Bank of Korea depends, first of all, the FOMC rate decision, the second half of this year. And also it depends upon Bank of Japan's, rate policy, second half of. So we judge our rate policy dependent upon United States and Japan, and considering future movements in the Bank of Japan and Federal Reserve, I think there's a pretty good chance that the Bank of Korea has to raise at least twice, because already we had 125 basis point lower than the United States. So even if United States doesn't change the rate, I think there's a strong chance that the Bank of Korea will raise it at least twice this year.
Then what about the other, policy paths in the second half of the year, Professor?
Oh, well, there's a recent report by myself that, even though stock price has been over 8,500, and the economic growth rate for the first quarter was 3.8%, so everything seems to be so fine. But if you look at the employment figure, the month of May figure shows that 40,000 decreased, and decrease in employment has been very rare for the last 20 years. Only in times of COVID-19, and only briefly after the martial law 2 years ago. So the employment situation has been getting very worse for the last, I think, half a year. So if that trends continue in the second half, I think real economic growth and private consumption would be significantly endangered, and that's going to have a significant effect upon real growth on the one hand and the stock price on the other. So other than interest rate policy, I think employment figure seems to be the very critical kind of aspect of Korean government as long as economic policy is concerned.
Right. So balance between supporting growth and containing inflation as well will be crucial moving forward. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion here tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Shin.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Brown as well. We really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate being on. And, I grew up in Gwangju in the 50s and 60s. So
Wow.
I want to
Okay.
give a
Shout out.
a show to everybody in Gwangju. So I want to say hi to everybody in Gwangju. Honam Gwangju, not Gyeonggyeong. Honam Gwangju.
We'll be looking
Nice to
forward
see you. Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Seeing you again. Thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.